Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome everybody for today's webinar. As you all know, it is going to be focused on the newly proposed rules by SEC, and we are going to be discussing on that. Our presenter for today's webinar is Mr. Ashwin. And before I hand over to him, just a quick thing. So, our webinar is going to be approximately for 1 hour, in which we are going to talk for nearly 40 to 45 minutes. And in the end 15 minutes, we are going to be running our polls and also simultaneously be conducting the Q&A session. So in the polls, we would love for everybody to participate and give us your feedback. And if you can see on your screen, there's a Q&A box. So towards the end of the webinar, if you have any questions pertaining to today's webinar, you can post it in your Q&A box and our presenter will be addressing those in the end 15 minutes. So welcome once again, and that's it from my side. I'll hand over to Mr. Ashwin.
Yeah, thank you, Alva, and welcome everybody for joining this session, which is on the new regulations proposed by SEC. Can you go next slide, Alva, please? Alva, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So today's agenda is not very big. It's a short agenda. What we will discuss is about the new regulations proposed changes and what an entity, covered entity with SEC would expect from the new proposed rules, what they should be doing and how they could, comply with these new regulations. And being a cybersecurity firm, Accedere, how can we help in this matter? So these are the three areas that we will quickly discuss today. Can you go next? Next. So quick introduction about Accedere. We are a cybersecurity focused CPA firm based out of Denver, Colorado. We have an office in Mumbai, India for doing the remote audits wherever possible. We focus on the AICPA, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, as well as the ISO/IEC certification for data security and privacy. We are an entity registered with PCAOB, and we also one of the impaneled auditors with Cloud Security Alliance. And these are the our accreditations. And there are only few entities worldwide which can do SOC 2 and ISO certifications along with VAPT under one banner, which is such as ours, called Accedere. Next. Some of the services that we do is SOC test reports, ISO/IEC certifications, US federal assessments, and our India office takes care of the India government the mandated assessments. We also do privacy assessments, vulnerabilities assessments, and pen tests, cloud security assessments, and some of the other security services that we will see now. Next slide, please. So these are the enlargement of the SOC reports and ISO/IEC certifications and the US federal assessments. India certain assessments as well as the FedRAMP, CMMC, FISMA, and some of the data security and privacy certifications covered in the ISO/IEC. That's what we manage. Okay, next slide, please. Alva, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, it's the next slide.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So our privacy assessments include the SOC 2 for privacy, GDPR, any specific US government mandatory laws, HIPAA compliance. In the application securities, we do application network and cloud testing in the pen testing space. We also cover cloud penetration testing, CSA, and C5 compliance, cloud container security, and other services include the blockchain, IoT security, and we also provide pen testers on long-term contract. Next slide, please. So integrated audits is our primary focus, where entities do multiple audits in one single audit timeline, which saves time and money for majority of our customers. Next. So let's get back to the US proposed rules. So primarily, recently there have been many changes, many proposed rules which have come out, and today we'll be focusing on the cybersecurity and privacy related ones. The first one is the S7 0723, which talks about regulation of system compliance and integrity. The second one is talking about the cybersecurity risk management. Third is talking about the privacy of consumer financial information and safeguarding customer information. The proposed rules are applicable to most of the clearing houses, brokers, and all the covered entities mentioned here. So we will go point by point, which is first is the systems and compliance integrity. Can we go on the next slide, please? So before we dive into each one of them, so there are overall expectations from the regulations and the industry response that has been seen by SEC. So first is that the SEC expects the um, investment advisors to be compliant with the proposed rules and to support SEC's efforts to improve cybersecurity practices, and then establish cybersecurity policies and procedures, and of course do periodic assessments from the cyber risk and the incident response perspective. So this is what is the overall objective, and the industry response is varied in the space. So since the response time is until, I believe, June, let us see what comes out of it. But we do believe as a cybersecurity professional that some modifications may happen, but the basic rules like complying with cybersecurity and privacy and all those regulations will come to stay. They may be doing some fine tuning based on the responses, but in all expectations, the rules will stay. Entities will have to comply with the most of the regulations, and let us see what they are and what is in store for us. Next slide, please. So, what is the regulation system compliance and integrity? It requires that market participants to have comprehensive policies and procedures in place to ensure the integrity of the system, right? It includes measures to prevent, detect, and respond. So the regulation will apply to all self-regulatory organizations, alternative trading systems, planned processes, exempt clearing agencies, and as a mandated for entities to comply with. Who's affected? So these are all the entities who will be required to comply with. So what it means is we need to create people, process, and technological controls to have an environment which is cyber safe, which will help us to prevent the cyber breaches, not only prevent, also detect cyber breaches and response to failures, errors, and breaches, all of them. Next slide, please. So the key components are that we need to create policies for ensuring the system integrity, right? We need to do periodic reviews. We need to notify SEC of any system disruptions and other events. We need to maintain records of all system disruptions and other events. We also need to look at the scope will include all most of the entities, and the objective is to strengthen the whole environment and the entire eco space in the BFSI segment. Next, please. Next is the cybersecurity risk management. The objective of this is to have the to address the risks associated with information technology systems, networks, and the potential impact on the investors in the market. So what happens is when there's a data breach, it affects all these investors and stakeholders. That is the whole objective. That although there's no 100% cybersecurity, but still we should be able to prevent or detect, or if there is a breach at all, right? We should be having processes to inform all the investors, the affected investors, and so on. So that is the whole objective of these rules. Next. So the importance of cybersecurity is also looking at the governance, which looks at the entire management of all the cybersecurity policies, procedures, risk management, and to provide periodic reviews and to ensure proper governance and as well as compliance to the SEC rules. Next slide, please. So the risk assessments must cover confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which is a CIA triad for the entire data which is being stored by the regulated entities. We identify potential risks, We identify and then prioritize those threats and vulnerabilities that may impact our environment, including the technological uh, threats. Like, say, if you're in a cloud environment, we have different kind of vulnerabilities and threats. If we are in a specific environment, we need to look at those. If you're having our own applications, then we need to do vulnerability assessments, pen testing for our own applications, and so on. So depending on what are the threats and vulnerabilities in our environment, we need to list down in an Excel sheet as per the entire IT assets. That is the first step. Normally, we do a risk assessment. We list down all of the assets and liabilities. Sorry, yes, all the assets, IT assets, and we look at the threats for those assets. What is the potential impact? And then we have risk mitigation activities, and then implement controls to make sure, or to at least try to get the risks under control. Right. So a risk can be critical or high, and once the control is implemented, it can become medium or low depending on the nature of the risk and the nature of the control that has been implemented. So then we develop mitigation strategies once we do a risk assessment, right? And then we assess the potential risk to look at what are the residual risks after putting all the controls. That is the whole risk management process, and there are free guidelines to do that. There's a risk management framework by NIST, and you can download that for free of cost. There's a ISO 31000 guidelines for risk management. So any you could use any of the free frameworks to do a risk management for your specific environment. Next slide, please. So cybersecurity risk management would also include access rights to and data loss prevention activities, such as we need to look at the access controls, who has access to what. We restrict the access to employees, party vendors. We implement data loss prevention measures where the data cannot be leaked, DLP, etc. And then we also have incident response plans, and to have the whole cybersecurity framework in terms of incident response. NIST has a free guideline even for creating an incident response, and I urge everyone to go to the NIST website and try to download those and go through them in case they want to implement it in their environment. Next slide, please. So another important aspect is to safeguard the privacy of the investors' information. So the consumers may have, or investors may have, their data with you, financial net worth, the trading details, the shareholding details, the banking details, etc., which is all PII data, and it needs to have a process in place for taking the entire privacy mandates in scope, including customer consent, including data anonymization, including storing data in encrypted format, having an entire document history, having an entire data life cycle approach for the entire data which is being stored into electronic format into your environments. So, conducting regular assessments and updating policies for security and privacy is what is the requirement under the new proposed rule. Next slide, please. So, what are the proposed changes? Is adding requirement for companies to provide customers with privacy notices annually. Um, Against that, companies need to comply with these regulations, right? And then providing notice to obtain customer consent, providing guidance as how to safeguard customer information. So how do we collect data, whether through our website, through emails? Where do we store that? What is the kind of data that is being stored into SharePoints or into databases and so on? And how do we manage the entire privacy life cycle for that data which is belonging to the customer? That is what is expected from these proposed rules on privacy. Next slide, please. So, how do we, look at these proposed rules? What is expected? What is expected is standardization processes. We need to have written policies and procedures. We need to safeguard clients' data and assets. We need to review our policies and safeguards at least annually. We need to define, document, and frequency of the review of the documents, which include policies and procedures. We need to periodically review client accounts. We need to maintain the entire records as per the mandates provided, and we need to verify the client assets which are being safeguarded. We need to do frequent audits depending on the number of clients and its criticality, and at least once a year we need to conduct those audits. And failure to do so would impact penalties and fines, which is proposed in the new rule. Next slide, please. So, what are the implications? The implications for investors is that they need to have more transparency and protection. They need to have more control over their personal information, which is being shared in the entire ecospace. They have to ensure their privacy rights, right? The benefits for firms is, if we implement all these policies, procedures, and controls, it reduces our risk of data breaches and identity theft. It protects customer information, and we will be complying to the not only SEC rules but any other mandates which may come in the future. Next slide, please. So, what do we expect? So, these are the three main rules, right? And what the industry should expect from these three major rules is increased analysis of cybersecurity practices. So, we need to analyze the company's cybersecurity, the firm's cybersecurity practices. We need to analyze our policies and procedures, existing ones, for preventing, detecting, and responding to cyber attacks. And what that if we fail to address the cybersecurity risks, what would be the enforcement actions by SEC on that? Next slide, please. So the importance of disclosure is companies must disclose information about what are their processes in terms of management of cyber risks and intimation of any data breaches in a timely manner to the investors. And if there's a failure to disclose, it can lead to potential legal liability and reputational damage besides SEC fines. And then consider cybersecurity practices to demonstrate their commitment towards protecting sensitive information. That is what the whole objective is. We need to demonstrate that we have the, the controls implemented in our environment, right, for detecting, preventing, and responding to cybersecurity events. That is the ultimate goal. Of course, privacy also. Next, next slide. So, how how do we prepare ourselves to comply with these rules, proposed rules rather? We need to conduct a cybersecurity risk assessment periodic, and then implement the policies, procedures, then ensure adequate resources to address cybersecurity risk, because controls are not only policies and procedures. You may have to implement tools. You may have to hire compliance personnel in-house, internal auditors, external auditors, and so on. So we will need to dedicate resources towards it. And cybersecurity is not an easy task. There's already an acute shortage of cyber professionals worldwide, and cybersecurity professionals are expensive. So you will need to dedicate resources to manage your security risks and to comply with the SEC. Right? You need to engage third parties if required, right, to implement the controls as well as to audit those controls. Next slide, please. So what can we do to comply with these rules? So I said earlier that in our opinion, these rules may have come to stay. The world is going towards cybersecurity compliance, and in our opinion, with slight tweaking of those proposed rules, right, majority of the rules may stay, right, and entities will have to comply with them. I don't see any other option other than that. In case we need to comply, it is not going to be a 1 day's job. It is not a 2 days job. It will take months for entities to get ready for implementing all the controls. It on an average it takes any time between 2 months to 6 months for the initial implementation of controls. So that is a span. So you start early, right? You have a heads up, you have ample time to plan it and to do it right. And that is the whole objective of this webinar, that we would like to bring this to you, that since since the proposed rules are already there, right? It may not be long enough before the rules come into force. Of course, they may give you in time, but it takes time. Even the GDPR, if you see, it was effective in the year 2018. Even almost after 5 years down the line, less than 50% of the companies are compliant to GDPR, even till date, even after 5 years of the entire rules. So privacy and security are not easy. Specifically, privacy is more difficult even than security. So you'll have to start well in advance to comply with these proposed rules. The four steps, which are also called the dimming cycle or the continuous improvement cycle, is a plan, do, check, and act. So whenever we implement any any tools, technologies, or processes, right, we need to plan first. Then we need to do the act part of it, which is the do. Then we keep checking whether we are doing it right and whether things are going in shape as expected. That is a check. And then again it goes to act process, whatever is the modification we need to do, whatever is the tweaking we need to do, we need to again keep doing the same cycle when we have new technologies, when we have new processes, when we have new requirements in the space. So this is the living cycle we all need to follow for implementing any policies, procedures in the security space, or even any other projects, of course. Right, please. So how do we comply with this? The first step is to document, of course, is to carry out the risk assessment as we saw earlier. So once you do a risk assessment, then you document your policies and procedures. Then you have your approvals, you have your budgets for implementing the tools and technologies as you have defined in your policies and procedures. And then implement the security and privacy controls as per your policies and procedures. Review your implementation, make sure that privacy and security controls are effective, right? Periodically collect the documents, evidences, monitor them, include your management and all other stakeholders for any requirements from them or feedback from them, or reporting for the governance, and for additional tools as required. Provide periodic training to all your employees, because human factor is one of the important factors which accounts for 60% of the data breaches even till date. And then we need to always conduct an internal audit and external audit to make sure that the controls are there, they are effective, and we are compliant with the mandates that we have. This is a simple process for any cybersecurity framework, whether security, privacy, and so on. Next slide, please. So what we would suggest is, there is a framework called the ISO IC 27001. The updated standard is 2022, which is the Information Security Management Standard Systems in place. So instead of you creating your own policies, procedures, and then validating every year and looking at manually or doing so, we suggest you to follow, or everyone to follow, a established framework which is available in the industry for almost last 20-25 years. Right. So this standard is one of the most common standards which many entities adopt or adapt for their environment, and make sure that they get audited every year against the standard, right? And to help you comply with most of these requirements for security. If you look at ISMS, ISMS looks at the information security, and then we look at the 27701 in the next few slides, which will take care of the privacy. So if you would go with both the standards, you will be able to comply with both security and privacy, and most of the other mandates which may come. Next slide, please. So it is one of the it's an international standard for security and sets the specifications for the entire information security management system. Right? It is one of the best security approaches. It is the best practices for people, process, and technology. It is a standard recognized worldwide and every part of the world recognizes the standard because it's an ISO/IEC standard. Most updated standard is a 2022 version, which was released in October 2022, and which we suggest you to implement uh, for complying with the system. Next slide, please. So it's looks at the the entire requirements and the entire life cycle from identifying risks, assessing risks, looking at the threats, right? Covering all the information assets as may be required under SEC, looking at confidentiality, integrity, and availability, looking at your risks for the vulnerabilities, the threats, the probabilities, the risk factors, and we could use any of the mitigation methodologies as avoiding risk, reducing risk, or accepting risk by implementing controls or as required under the risk assessment methodology. Next slide, please. So, how do we comply with the SEC rules using the standard, which is the 27001? So the first step to adopting the standard is, of course, to those processes which we discussed earlier, right? Doing a risk assessment, doing documenting policies, procedures, and implementing people technologies. Then once we have done all of that, right, we create a statement of applicability, right? We update our risk register accordingly to match the statement of applicability. Of course, we already have the documented policies to align. We may have some certain controls as required by ISO regarding the entity controls and all controls, etc. Which we have to align with the statement of applicability. And then, of course, we also align the people process security controls based on the statement of applicability into our environment. Next slide. So the main structure of the 27001 standard is the clauses 1 to 3 are the ISO defaults. The clauses 4 to 8 talk about 4 to 10, sorry, talk about the context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, etc. of the entire ISMS. So here we are talking of the information security management system, right, which talks about the entire clauses 4 to 10. And then we have the Annex controls, which are about 93 in number, about 93, 94 in number. Can we go to the next slide to see the Annex controls? So Annex A.5 looks at the organization controls, which are 37. We look at the people process controls, HR controls, background checks, etc., which are about 8 in number. Then we look at physical security controls and physical checks, which are about 14. The majority of the other controls are the technology controls, which are in 30. So totally, we have about 90-95 controls here, which you will be implementing into your environment based on a standardized framework. Once you adopt the standard framework, right, you will have the entire 360-degree angle covered from the policies. If you do it in a piecemeal basis, you may be forgetting certain areas, certain aspects of the security policy procedures. But if you follow an established standard, right, you're trying to get a whole visibility, entire 360-degree angle to make sure most of the aspects are covered as required for your entity and for your specific environment. Next slide, please. So, the new standard is effective from October 2022, and the old certification, which is the 2013 standard, will be valid only till October 2023. So, if you are looking to implement the standard, we would suggest to go with the new standard 2022, because after October 2023, the old standard cannot be implemented for the first time. And even those who have those standards implemented old standards will have to migrate, right, from October 2023 itself. The new ones you will not be able to do it, and old ones, the maximum timeline for that standard is October 2025. So we suggest you to go with the new standard, and new standard has more controls in terms of incident response, which is one of the new requirements of SEC proposed rules. Next slide, please. So the next framework which is in tandem with the 27001 is the 27701, which is the PIMS, Privacy Information Management System. system, which is an add-on to the standard, which takes care of all the privacy requirements which may be regulated as part of the new SEC requirements. And if you adopt this standard, it will take into account your all your privacy requirements which SEC has proposed in the new. Next slide, please. So the privacy standard talks about assurance to data subjects' rights and of their customers. It integrates with the 27001 standard. It provides visibility to data management approaches with their partners. It helps to identify, prioritize risks through the entire data life cycle. It helps to achieve compliance with data protection regulations. Indicates assurance that PII, which is the privacy information, can be managed without infringing data subjects' privacy. So as I said earlier, using a defined standard helps you comply with the SEC rules, and that is what is our suggestion, and that is what we are trying to explain you, which we are trying to deliberate in this webinar. That use a defined standard to comply with most of the requirements, and if you use this standard, you'll be able to comply with most of the SEC regulations. Next slide, please. So the 27701 is aligned, as I told you, with the 27001 standard. It is based on the ISO 29100, which is the privacy framework, and it provides a whole framework and the guidance as to how you need to implement the 27701 into your environment and get it certified. Also aligns to the 27002, which is the guidelines to 27001 as to how you need to implement the controls. And if you're having your own cloud and you're having the PII in the cloud, it aligns to the 2780, which is the cloud controls for privacy. So for the data protection, it is already aligned to GDPR and other data privacy mandates. So if you implement this, it will be aligned to most of the privacy mandates in place as of now. Next slide, please. So the major benefits of adopting these standards, as we told you, we follow an established ISO-IC process, which has been there for about 20-25 years or so. We provide assurance to third parties. Once we have a certificate, we can provide a certificate. Not only certificate, we provide the audit reports to them, to the stakeholders. We can show that we are complying with the best practices, which is ISMS and the PIMS. We demonstrate compliance for security and privacy to SEC or any other mandates that you may have. Right? It will help your internal stakeholders, your internal auditors, your external auditors, and your third parties to see that you are complying with the industry best practices. That's the major benefits, and of course, you will be definitely compliant with your, and you have a better image with your customers and investors. Next slide, please. That's it. That's all I had to say. This is our disclaimer that whatever is said today was general in nature. It may or may not apply to your entity. So, in case you need anything specific advice, how that will affect your entity or it may be applicable to your entity, you can have a one-to-one call, or you can always send us an email at info@accedere.io. We now put the question and answers open, and there's a poll which Ava will also run. And in case we have any questions, please post them, and we'll be happy to answer them.
So the polls have been started, and there are just three questions, and we would love if everybody can participate. And as Mr. Ashwin said, if you guys have any questions, please post it in the Q&A box, and we'll be addressing those too.
We'll wait for a few moments. So as of now, I don't see any questions. So good. There were no questions. So I think everybody has understood what they need to do. Entities need, they are experts. They know what they need to do. Great. So if you have any questions, even in future, please revert back to us. We'll be more than happy to have a one-to-one call with you, and we can do a webinar with you. We can evaluate your environment and see what is the best option for you. And I thank you very much. Thank everybody to have come and devoted their time, and I'll give back some minutes to you. Have a great day. Have a nice have a nice day, and thank you very much. Alva, you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one more thing that, as Sir said, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. We also offer training programs related to ISO 27001, and we'll also be launching the PIMS, which is the privacy program, training programs very soon this month itself. So if you have any training related requirements, also you can always check out our website, and do follow us on LinkedIn. We're also there on Instagram, and you can that way stay updated with the upcoming webinars. And yeah, stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Hold on, just I see uh, a question is here, so let me answer that before I quit. Is it mandatory to comply with these newly proposed rules? Yes, and what is the timeline? So I believe it would, as I said earlier, these are all proposed rules, not yet effective, but the timelines will be provided by SEC once the rules are finally announced. And of course, any regulation which is by SEC is definitely mandatory to comply. So there are no options. Entities will have to comply with these rules. Thank you. I think there are no more questions. So thank you once again. Thank you, everybody.